today we bring our series to an end with one last lesson from Joseph about rising up when you've been knocked down, about setting yourself up for success after experiencing setback, about moving on from the past in order to fully embrace a new beginning. Let me give you the setting. It was at the end of that run of horrible, no good, very bad days for Joseph, after being betrayed by family, after being sold into slavery, after being falsely accused, after being put in prison, after being forgotten by those he had served. After it all, he suddenly found himself serving the Pharaoh as the functioning manager of all of Egypt, because he had been released from prison in order to interpret a dream that Pharaoh had. God enabled Joseph to do just that. The interpretation given to him by God was that there was going to be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. And Joseph advised Pharaoh that because this was going to happen, this was going to come true, he needed to find someone capable. Best manager he could find, put him in charge of managing the 7 years of plenty well so that they could get through the 7 years of famine. And Pharaoh essentially said, "Great, you're it." And Joseph embarked on leading and managing the affairs of the largest, most powerful socio-political entity on the planet, the entire Egyptian empire. Yet there was still one last thing that Joseph did that we can learn from, that really made all the difference in the world at that moment, that made it so that he really could turn the page from all of that collective setback on everything that had happened before in his life and embrace this phenomenal new opportunity that lay before him. What was it that he did? Well, he named his children. Hang with me. In the ancient Near Eastern culture of that day, naming was important. It still is. We take time coming up with the names of our kids, and then we mark that name like a tattoo in our lives. Or some people literally tattoo the name of their children on their lives. My youngest son, Zach, has gotten a tattoo representing the name for each one of his children. Bear came first, so he got a tattoo of a bear's face. Then came Boone, and he got a tattoo of the mountains surrounding the town of Boone. They've got a third child, another boy, due actually any day. They haven't surfaced with a name yet, but I hope they think through that tattoo tradition so that after a Bear and a Boone, if they stick with another name starting with B, they don't pick something like Brooklyn, because there's just not enough ink for that in the world if you want to capture that on your back. The good news is that I'm pretty sure they know to stay away from bowel, butt, bottom, and bladder, but we'll see. You can pray for them. Names matter, and they almost always hold some kind of significance for the person, and particularly for the parent. Susan and I wanted, for example, each of our 4 children to have one name from us and one name from the Bible. So we had Susan Rebecca and Rachel Elizabeth, reflecting my wife's name of Susan Elizabeth and Rebecca and Rachel from the Bible. My sons are Jonathan Emery and Zachary James, reflecting my name of James Emery, and the Bible's Jonathan and Zacchaeus, or Zach. Joseph was no different. He put a lot of time and thought into the name of his sons, and he named his first son Manasseh. Now, why was that the name chosen by him? Because of what it meant. In Hebrew, Manasseh meant forget. Forget. Now, why did he do that? The Bible records Joseph's own words. Joseph named his older son Manasseh, for he said, "God has made me forget all my troubles and everyone in my father's family." Now, there's so much in that statement to take hold of. That Joseph had reached a point of forgetting all that had happened to him, that he had reached a point of forgetting the people in his family that had done it to him, and that this whole forgetting thing was just all part of his relationship with God and was a gift from God and was a result of his hope in God. And what is all that about? Did Joseph actually forget? Did God give him a case of holy amnesia? No, but that's not the only way to forget. Because Joseph stayed true to God and trusted God with everything, including the pain of his childhood and much of his adulthood that resulted from what happened to him as a boy, because he kept giving that to God and turning it over to God and looking to what God would do in the days to come and the years to come, honoring God in whatever situation he found himself in through vision and integrity and attitude, God brought a new life out of the wreckage. At every stage, Joseph kept looking forward and moving forward, trying to advance his life forward, trusting God no matter what. So his forgetting was more about putting it behind him, not wallowing in it, not focusing on it, not giving into a victim mentality. Instead, at every turn, looking forward to what would be and could be, finding a new vision for himself, a new defining reality. He knew that the key to everything that was now set to begin at this critical juncture, everything essential to going forward, putting everything that had happened in the past and putting it away and behind him so that he could seize fully the opportunity at the hand, hinged on forgetting. Or as the Apostle Paul would write many years later in the New Testament portion of the Bible about his own life. He said, "Not that I have already obtained all this or have already been made perfect, but I press on to take hold of that for which Christ Jesus took hold of me. I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it, but one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal." It's interesting that when Paul wrote, "Forget what is behind," he used a particular tense of the Greek language that means a continuous, ongoing forgetting. The best way to translate that into the English language is keep on forgetting the past. It was this ongoing, intentional, daily habit of forgetting. But I mentioned Joseph naming his sons, plural, because he had another, with another telling name reflecting a lot about Joseph. If the first name reminded him of what he needed to do to have a new beginning, the second name would remind him of what that new beginning held. He named his second son Ephraim, which is Hebrew for twice fruitful. Now, did he name him that just because it was his second son, twice fruitful? No, it was more than that. Again, Joseph's own words. Joseph named his second son Ephraim, for he said, "God has made me fruitful in this land of my grief." Now, in naming his sons this way, Joseph was proclaiming to the world that God had made him forget all of his troubles and had made him fruitful where he was in a place that to that point had brought him nothing but pain. Joseph was saying God had Manasseh him and then Ephraim'd him. In other words, whatever it is you need to forget in the past, do it so that you can receive what God has waiting for you in the future. When he named his son Ephraim, he knew what he was wanting to declare. Even though his life seemed like one long string of setbacks, he was going to stay true to God. He was going to, even though he went from one pit to another, he was going to declare that God was always at work. There was a plan, a purpose, a destination. And that's so true. It took being thrown into the pit by his brothers to be taken to Egypt. It took going to prison while in Egypt to meet a royal official from Pharaoh's court. It took 2 years of being forgotten by that official in order to be remembered at just the right time to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. And from that to be placed in managerial charge of the entire empire. And from that position, I might add, which we won't take time to explore, but from that position, he was able to save the Jewish people during the famine. He brought his entire family, made up of the Jewish people at that time, to Egypt and saved them and saw them grow and flourish in Egypt, eventually leading to declaring independence from Egypt under the leadership of a man named Moses, and then heading out to the Promised Land and establishing the nation of Israel, and one day producing the Messiah, Jesus. God knew what he was doing with Joseph. And make no mistake, Joseph understood it too, saw it clearly, that in everything God was at work. Let me give you a little side note here that kind of reflects that and goes back to Ephraim and being twice blessed, and why there might be more to that than meets the eye in the 2 part of that. It's the symbolism of the number 2. Do you remember that when Joseph told the Pharaoh that everything in his dream would happen, that was why there were 2 versions of it? That there would be 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine, because God confirmed it with a second dream? The fact that there were 2 dreams shows that the events were a God thing and would happen. That was the interpretation Joseph gave it, that God would make it so. God was in it. Now, if that's what the 2 means in this story, think about all that we've tracked with so far in the life of Joseph in relation to the number 2. Joseph's father, Jacob, was tricked into marrying 2 wives. He had 2 sons by the wife he loved. Joseph was one of those 2 sons. There were 2 dreams in prison, one by the cupbearer and one by the baker. Joseph waited 2 years before being remembered in prison. Pharaoh had the 2 dreams. In the Bible, the dreams and their interpretations were repeated twice, once in Genesis 40 and then again in Genesis 41. The point is that in all of this, not to look for the 2s in your life as confirmation that God is up to something. You drive by a house for sale by accident twice, and you just feel like, okay, now I'm supposed to buy it because God's in it. No. The point is that in Joseph's life, as in ours, God was doing something purposeful. His life and the events of his life were not senseless. They weren't random. They weren't chaotic. He could look back and see in every step of the way this sense of God confirming everything that was happening through the symbolism of the 2s, that he was in it and working through it. The Ephraim moment is ahead, but first comes the Manasseh resolve. So, let's bring this back to you and to me. What do you need to forget about 2020 in order to truly have a new beginning in 2021? To be fruitful, to receive all that God would bring into your life. What do you have to Manasseh before you can Ephraim? Could it be some of the very same things Joseph had to forget? For Joseph, wasn't it the betrayal and dysfunction of his family of origin, the series of events that entailed setback after setback, wrong after wrong, and finally people who betrayed, falsely accused, and forgot about him entirely? In other words, he had to forget family dynamics, events, people. Well, let's just hone in on 2020. What needs forgetting there? I know we are all saying to each other, we're ready to forget 2020. Are we? How much of it in truth are we still clinging to, still holding on to, bringing along with us into 2021 as a part of our lives? What haven't we even tried to forget that we desperately need to? For some of you, you need to forget what's been dividing us, the divisions. Divisions on who to vote for, whether or not to wear a mask, what should be open, what should be closed, conspiracy theories. Was there ever a more divisive year relationally in terms of community, in terms of neighbors and coworkers and friends and family? Do you need to forget some of that? Just forget some of those things that were so divisive and that you even let be divisive and move on? And what about the resentment and anger you might have experienced in 2020 about the lockdowns and working at home and the lack of childcare and empty shelves in the grocery stores, or more intensely for some of us, the loss of income or maybe even a job, or maybe you even lost a loved one? Is anger and resentment and bitterness and frustration filling your mind, filling your heart, polluting your soul? Anything boiling in you just under the surface and you need to practice the art of forgetting? Let me just kind of give you a few tests, if you're willing to go there, for figuring out what you might need to forget. Is there, for example, if there is something that you find yourself thinking about over and over again that happened in the past, and every time you think about it, you feel renewed anger and frustration and bitterness, okay, it's time to forget. If you find yourself having imaginary conversations with someone, while you're in the shower or something, and they're filled with anger and argument and insult and cutting remarks, and you're just having this imaginary kind of, back and forth. If you take certain situations and certain conversations, online or in person, and keep whatever happened, whatever someone said or has done, alive and well, almost like you are rehearsing it and nursing it along and cementing it into your psyche, it's time to forget. If you continually look at all that 2020 did to you and maybe didn't do to someone else and find yourself seething with envy and jealousy and resentment, it's time to forget. If you find yourself without vision, sacrificing integrity, catering to a poor attitude. It's time to forget. Because until you can forget, meaning moving on, letting go, it'll be remembered, which means kept alive with all of its chains and weight and just crud. And you'll let having what happened in the past be this ever-present dynamic in the here and now in such a way that it will destroy your ability to embrace the future God would love to bring to you. And that's a sad existence. Because if you never Manasseh, you never Ephraim. You'll never experience the blessing waiting for you on the other side of whatever it was you chose to never forget. So what will you do in relation to all that happened in 2020? Just go back over what we've spent these last few weeks on. Will you lose sight of God's vision of your life, or will you keep it squarely in front of you as we begin a new year? And if you don't have a vision, pray like mad for one that God will give it to you because He's got it. Will you invest in integrity in all that you do so that you can experience all that it will bring back and reward you for in the long run? Will you have the kind of positive attitude that creates a powerful fortitude as we're in this messy middle? And the last lesson, will you forget so that you can be blessed? Choose to see, to believe, to trust in God's hand. And whatever pairs of two you may have experienced that you've only looked at negatively, and trust that God is in control and has a dream for your life. You know, I thought about something that I wasn't thinking about at all when I was working on this talk and wrote it. Thinking about these pairs of two and trusting God. You know, through all the pairs of two Joseph went through, and he had to trust God and look back and saw God working through those. And it was a funny thing, all of a sudden it just hit me. Pairs of two. Isn't that what 2020 was? Two twos. Maybe God wanted to work through that as well.